Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the WAC Academy, the AUM podcast for writing across the curriculum. Last, we talked about transfer and how freshman composition sets a good foundation for writing in college and beyond. This week begins Discipline Month, where we focus on writing in the various fields across campus. To help me this week, we have Elizabeth Burrows here to discuss writing and philosophy. In case you missed last week's episode, Ms. Burrows has a background in writing centers and teaching at the university level for over a decade now.
Hi, everyone.
Since you were here last week, let's talk about the similarities first.
Sounds like a plan. The good news is there's lots of similarities between writing in your freshman comp classes and writing in philosophy, so pay attention, everyone. The first similarity is that philosophy papers are thesis-driven, which should sound familiar to your English 1020 project. You might also need to explain why your audience should care about your thesis, and then you need clear support to write your papers. Philosophy papers and assignments shouldn't be done in one session, so use that writing process. Finding sources in the library should also look familiar to freshman comp, even using some of the same databases such as JSTOR and Academic Search Premier, though there are some philosophy-specific resources to check out in the library.
What can philosophy majors expect in terms of differences?
This is where it gets fun, Mike. From what I've seen on LibGuides and Writing Center worksheets, in addition to some material from philosophy professors here at AUM, there are two major types of papers, though they are sometimes called different things. One is the critical paper, which critiques a philosophy position or question. The other is a constructive paper, which seeks to prove a position or idea is true. You can see why the thesis is so important here. There are some other clear distinctions as well. The introduction should definitely present the issue at hand, but also articulate why it's important to consider. The counter-arguments are even more important in philosophical writing. If you've ever had a philosophical conversation outside of class, then you know what you're getting into. If you haven't, definitely read up on them, and we're providing some of these resources for you online after the podcast.
While we have some time, let's do a fun question. If philosophy was a sport, what would it be and why?
Writing and thinking in philosophy is like tennis. You go back and forth with points and counterpoints, but the object isn't really to win, it's to play the game and advance your thinking on the subject.
What's one of the main concepts you think students should consider when it comes to writing in philosophy?
Wording is super important. What you'll find is that while philosophers disagree on the range and methods for philosophical questions, they do agree that personal opinions do not a philosophy paper make. Instead, it's all about clarity of the question at hand and then providing clear, logically structured arguments in support or critique of that topic. Obviously, it's important to talk to your professor about the specific assignment, but a lot of the advice out there is to say exactly what you mean and no more, and to be careful about the specified language. In your comp class, you might have used fancy synonyms for things, but in philosophy, that can get you into trouble if you're even a little unclear about what those words mean. So stick to what you know. Define a term early on in your paper if you need to, so your readers understand what you mean by that term. If you click on the Harvard University link provided, you can read more about this.
I know we are running out of time, but we can't neglect grading. You know that's one of the most frequent questions for us here at the WAC Academy.
Of course. So here's the thing. Always ask your professor about the expectations for an assignment. However, there are some guidelines that are connected across the resources. It's not enough to address the philosophical question. Instead, you need to find a way to clearly define the issue, organize your discussion around a thesis that includes evidence and support that covers your counter-argument or counter-arguments. Your paper should have depth and make progress in addressing your question. If you're striving for that A, then you need to cover all the elements of your particular question.
As a sum up, what word jumps to mind when thinking about philosophical writing?
Semantics. Because philosophy tries to advance thinking about concepts or questions, semantics becomes crucial. For example, you wouldn't write a paper about how abortion should be considered murder. That's more likely an English research topic. However, you might find yourself debating the relative morality of abortion, because with that you can go back and forth almost endlessly. You'll have to know the definition and meaning for words so you can write about them.
As a teacher, what's your best advice for philosophy students?
Stay open-minded. This is important in life, and in college, but especially in philosophy. You're going to have to be able to push yourself to think about all the angles of a question. Being open-minded is a writing tool in that way.
Thanks again, Ms. Burrows. And please remember to check out the resources she's helped gather on this so you can read for yourself what schools like AUM and Harvard have to say about philosophy and writing. Hint, hint, they're pretty similar. Next week, we'll be talking about psychology, and our special guest will be Dr. McGlynn, who always have great stories about his experiences working in hospitals and universities. Tune in next week for the WAC Academy Discipline Month focused on psychology.